Hello everyone, today I want to share with you the story of a single mother named lytutien. Tuna was born in a poor rural village, where winter winds could cut through skin and summer sun scorched the earth. Her childhood was made of misty mornings following her mother into the fields, her tiny feet caked with mud, her clumsy little hands plucking grains of rice. At noon, she would hide from the blazing sun under the shade of bamboo, listening to the constant hum of cicadas, and share with her mother a humble meal of wild greens and a few salty pieces of braised fish. Yet, in her eyes always flickered a quiet belief that if she persevered, she could one day step out of a life of hardship. In her early 20s, Tuna left the crooked, thatched home of her childhood to follow her husband to another village. She carried with her a heart full of hope, dreams of a house filled with children's laughter, of warm family meals, and of a husband who would be her lifelong shelter. But reality wrapped her in a cold, gray shadow. The man she had placed all her trust in was not a safe harbor, but an empty room without warmth. By day, Tuna toiled endlessly, planting rice, hauling water, taking on any work she could to help support her husband's family. At night, even with her body drained of strength, she still had to cook, wash, tend to her ailing mother-in-law, and endure her husband's indifference. Years passed, but the cradle in the corner of her heart remained empty. That unfulfilled hope became the excuse for her husband and mother-in-law's growing distance and disdain. Once rare words of concern disappeared entirely, replaced by cutting remarks and eyes that stared with open contempt. Mealtimes, once meant for gathering together, became nothing more than the cold clink of bowls, sharp reproaches, and heavy silences. In the very house that was meant to be her refuge, Tuna felt like nothing more than a shadow. Every effort she made dissolved into nothingness, unseen by anyone. Her sacrifices and care were never acknowledged. And then, one night in a pounding rainstorm, her husband's angry shouts mixed with the sound of rain slashing against the roof, and Tuna realized, if she stayed, she would remain trapped forever in this cycle of darkness. She didn't know where the road ahead would lead, nor what tomorrow would bring, but she knew it was time to leave. Beneath the cold curtain of rain, her figure slowly disappeared at the end of the narrow lane, marking the beginning of a new journey, one full of storms, but at least a road of her own. That afternoon, the sky hung heavy, wrapped in a thick gray blanket. Low, brooding clouds pressed down as if warning that rain would soon pour. From the distant fields, cold gusts of wind swept in, carrying dampness that tangled through Tuna's disheveled hair. Mud clung to her heels, heavy as if she wore shackles. On her calloused hands, streaks of hardened dirt still remained from a long day's labor. Sweat, mingled with the salty tang of dust, slid down to the corners of her mouth. Her mind lingered on the small, everyday thoughts that tethered her to life: what to cook for dinner, whether the bundle of greens on the table would stay fresh until her mother-in-law ate, and if the food would be to her taste. But as she stepped through the gate, the familiar scene before her seemed to have been erased and redrawn in strange lines. She froze. On the porch, standing close beside her husband, was a woman she had never seen before. Her sleek, black hair was neatly coiled, revealing a porcelain neck. Her delicate face was painted just enough to sharpen every feature. Her eyes held no trace of shyness, instead, they shone with a self-assured pride, as if silently declaring that this was her domain. The space between them was so narrow that with the slightest tilt, their hands could have touched. Before Tuna could utter a word, her husband's voice cut through the air, cold, sharp, and precise as a knife. "Mother, this is my new wife. She's carrying my child." In that instant, every sound around her seemed to collapse. Her heart skipped, then plunged into an endless void. The air thickened until it choked her, her throat tightening as if bound. Her mother-in-law, the woman who had treated her with years of frosty indifference, suddenly transformed. She hurried to the stranger's side, her hands trembling with joy as she clasped the woman's fingers, her eyes lighting up, her smile radiant as though she had found a long-lost treasure. The warmth Tuna had waited for all these years had finally arrived, but it belonged entirely to someone else. Struggling to keep her voice steady and her tears from spilling, Tuna forced the words out, each one scraping her throat. "Why, are you treating me like this?" Her mother-in-law turned, eyes sharp as blades, her words slicing without hesitation. What's the point of keeping a woman who can't bear children? That blow shredded the last piece of pride in Tuna's heart. But before she could recover, the man who had once promised, "No matter what happens, we'll stay together," spoke again with cutting finality. "If you can't give me a child, you have no value here." Without another word, they rushed into her room, flinging open the wardrobe. Clothes, blankets, and every personal belonging were yanked out and hurled into the yard as if tossing away worthless trash. The clatter of her things hitting the ground echoed in the still air, mingling with the wind whistling through the roof tiles, a sound that felt like cruel laughter. The wedding dress she had cherished lay sprawled, coated in dust. Winter blankets she had washed and folded with care were now damp with evening dew and streaked with dirt. No word of thanks for the years she had bent her back for the family. No hint of pity for the nights she stayed awake to care for the sick. Only raw, unvarnished cruelty. The iron gate shut behind her with a dry clang, sealing off every path back. Before her stretched a narrow lane, long and desolate. She clutched her meager bag to her chest, while the damp, cold wind sliced through her thin clothes, biting at her skin. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, yet her heart was being pulled away, adrift toward nowhere. Every sound faded until there was nothing left but her own ragged breaths and the hollow silence swallowing her whole. In the fading light, the small figure of a woman stood motionless, like a leaf torn from its branch by the season's wind, not knowing where it would be carried. Thrown out of her home, Lytutien drifted forward, not knowing where her steps were taking her. The village road stretched endlessly ahead, draped in a dark, ashen hue that seemed to swallow the last light of day. On either side, thin bamboo stalks swayed gently, their yellowing leaves breaking free, spinning a few times before landing softly on the earth. Beneath her bare feet, jagged stones and sharp gravel bit into her skin, leaving burning scratches. Yet the deepest pain she felt wasn't in her feet, it was the slow-burning fire of humiliation smoldering deep in her chest. She had nowhere to return to. No roof that would welcome her in. No relatives to seek shelter with, no friend close enough to knock on their door and ask for a night's stay. Each step forward felt like walking into a world that had already closed every door in her face. And so, Tuna trudged on, her eyes empty. She passed fields where the rice had just been harvested, the musty scent of straw and damp earth clinging to her clothes and hair. From time to time, she walked by houses glowing with light, where laughter and the clinking of dishes spilled out into the night. What might have been warm, comforting sounds now cut into her like knives, reminders that she no longer belonged to any home. Darkness crept in. The mild autumn breeze from earlier had sharpened into icy gusts, slicing through her thin clothing and seeping into her bones. Ahead, an old bridge came into view. Moss stained its surface, and the iron railings were mottled with rust. Below, the river lay black and still, eerily calm, like a bottomless abyss waiting to swallow whatever drifted toward it. She stepped closer, laying her freezing hands on the frigid metal railing. From here, Tuna peered into the dark depths. A thought flickered through her mind, perhaps with just one step, all her pain would disappear. The thought sent a shiver through her, yet it carried an almost irresistible pull. The wind from the river surged upward, so cold it seemed to freeze her tears. Droplets fell, vanishing into the endless black below. She stood there for a long time, from the moment the sky still held a trace of dusk until night had consumed it entirely. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind her. A middle-aged man in a worn sweater stopped short at the sight of her small figure standing motionless by the railing. His voice carried hesitation, but also concern. "Are you, all right? Don't do anything rash." Tuna gave a faint shake of her head, lips pressed tight as if holding back an ocean of tears. She turned and walked away, leaving behind the stranger's bewildered gaze. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Her body ached, each step as heavy as dragging an invisible weight. The night wind grew fiercer, slipping into every gap in her clothing, whipping against her neck, making her shiver uncontrollably. Then, along a deserted stretch of road, she spotted an abandoned drainage pipe. Its opening was narrow, just enough for one person to crawl through. Inside, the darkness was thick, the damp concrete floor radiating an icy chill. The stench of mold mixed with rotting garbage stung her nose, yet to tieu na, it was the only place that could shield her from the wind and night dew. She crawled inside, curling up in a corner, wrapping her arms tightly around herself to preserve what little warmth she had left. Her empty stomach began to twist, the hunger gnawing like hundreds of tiny blades scraping her insides. The sound of it growling echoed loudly in the still night, painfully stark. Closing her eyes, she tried to force herself to sleep, to forget the hunger, the cold. But the darkness couldn't erase her memories. The house she had just left, her husband's frozen stare, her mother-in-law's triumphant smile, they replayed in her mind as vividly as if they were happening before her eyes, along with the sound of the door slamming shut behind her. Outside, the distant barking of dogs faded into silence. The night wind howled through the pipe's opening, blending with the uneven, shallow breaths of the young woman inside. A long, endless night lay ahead, and tieu na had no way of knowing whether, when the morning came, she would still have the strength to rise and walk on, or if she would remain forever in this cold, shadowed corner. The next morning, as the sky was only faintly touched with the first light of day and a thin layer of mist spread across the ground, lytutien slowly opened her eyes. The dampness of dawn crept through the mouth of the drainage pipe, pricking her skin like icy needles. The concrete floor beneath her still held the deep, penetrating cold from the night before, leaving her back numb and her shoulders heavy as if she had carried a great load for miles. But it was the gnawing hunger, twisting in waves through her stomach, that ultimately pulled her out of her restless sleep. From somewhere far off came the chirping of early birds, sounds belonging to a world she had been pushed beyond, a world where people awoke under warm blankets, in homes scented with breakfast, not surrounded by the musty odor of mold and garbage. She turned to gather what little she still owned, a few wrinkled, worn-out clothes, a thin scarf, all stuffed into a faded cloth bag with frayed edges. Leaving the cold, damp pipe behind, she took a deep breath, unsure if it was to gather strength or to swallow down the tightness rising in her throat. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. No one could tell her where to go, each step simply carried her farther from the place that had cast her out. Passing the morning food stalls, the smell of freshly steamed buns and steaming chicken porridge rose with the warm mist, curling toward her face like invisible hands trying to hold her still. Her stomach answered with loud growls, and the steam from a pot of broth made her eyes sting for a moment. But with not a single coin in her pocket, she could only pause for a few seconds, glance through the open doorway, then turn away, swallowing hard to quiet the hunger clawing at her insides. Just then, a middle-aged woman stepped out from a small eatery. Her apron was faded and worn, and she still held a rag in her hand. Her gaze swept over the street before stopping at tieu na's thin frame and weary face. Without asking many questions, the woman walked over and pressed a small paper bag into her hands. The warm aroma of freshly steamed dough rose immediately. "Here, eat this before you get too hungry," the woman said, her voice warm but firm. Tieu na froze for a moment, then bowed her head to receive it, her voice tight with emotion. "Thank you," and she knew that if she said another word, the tears would come. She made her way to an open patch of ground beneath a bridge and chose a small rock to sit on. The cold from the earth seeped through her thin clothing, but the warm bun in her hands brought a faint flicker of comfort. She opened the paper bag, breathing in the scent of steamed dough mingled with the savory filling inside. The first bite touched her lips, and her throat tightened. It was delicious, yet bittersweet. She ate one slowly, saving the second by wrapping it carefully and tucking it deep into her bag, a reserve for when the hunger became unbearable. After sitting for a while, she lifted her gaze toward the distant street. Today, no matter what, she had to find work. She had no capital, no connections, only her calloused hands and what little strength remained. But at least, that was something she could offer to begin again. Tieu na went from street to street, stopping at every shop she came across, from small grocery stalls to food vendors, from noisy sewing workshops to the crowded corners of the market, asking if anyone needed help. Time after time, she was met only with shakes of the head, or the same familiar line. "Sorry, we're not hiring." By noon, the sun was high overhead, and the concrete pavement radiated scorching heat, each step burning like walking over live coals. The back of her shirt was soaked with sweat, its salty sting mixing with the dust that clung to her lips. Weariness tugged at her, tempting her to sit down anywhere, but she forced herself to keep moving, because stopping would mean accepting that the world had left her behind. The sun had tilted toward the west, its midday glare now softened into a gentle gold, casting the forest in a warm light tinged with the melancholy of late afternoon. On the narrow path leading to the outskirts of town, Tuna dragged her weary steps. Passing a woodworking shop tucked beneath the canopy of ancient trees, the faint scent of freshly cut timber drifted on the wind, stirring memories of her childhood, sitting beside her father as he repaired the rickety tables and chairs at home. The steady whir of saws cutting wood blended with the rhythmic clink of hammers. She stopped before the iron gate, her heart tightening. All day, cold rejections had worn down what little faith she had left, but she knew that if she didn't step inside, no opportunity would ever come. Tightening her grip on the strap of her worn cloth bag, she drew a deep breath, pushed aside her hesitation, and slipped through the gate. The man who greeted her was the workshop manager, around 40, tall and broad-shouldered. His eyes were deep and serious, but without the coldness she had come to expect. He listened quietly as she spoke, from her trembling voice at the start to the moment she struggled to hold back her tears. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Come back tomorrow morning. I'll have someone show you the work." Those words were like a stream of cool water poured onto the parched soil of her heart. The exhaustion and gnawing hunger eased for a moment, replaced by a rare sense of relief she hadn't felt in days. Yet before the joy could fully settle, reality pulled her back. Night was coming, and she still had no place to sleep. In the west, the sunset burned like ribbons of red silk stretched across the sky. Tuna knew that once darkness fell, without shelter, she would again have to surrender herself to the cold wind and night dew. Following a gravel-strewn path, she turned into the nearby forest. Dry branches cracked under her feet, mingling with the rustle of leaves. The last light of day filtered through the canopy in faint streaks. Then, behind a tangle of dense foliage, she spotted the narrow mouth of a small cave. The entrance was low and tight, but inside it ran deep enough to keep out the wind and rain. Stepping in, the chill from the stone walls struck her face, making her shiver. Beneath her feet, layers of dry leaves and loose soil had gathered. Kneeling down, she scooped away clumps of damp, moldy leaves and tossed them outside. She pushed aside fallen branches, carefully clearing away small stones until the floor was more level. Her shirt clung damply to her back with sweat, but seeing the cleaner space made it easier to breathe. Leaving the cave, she searched for materials. Large, green banana leaves were cut and folded neatly into thick layers, then spread across the stone floor to make a crude mattress. It was simple, but when she pressed her hand to it, the soft coolness of the leaves felt far better than the hard chill of bare rock. She didn't stop there. Skirting the forest's edge, Tuna collected dry branches, stacking them into a bundle. From time to time, she crouched to dig up wild cassava roots buried beneath the damp soil. Dirt wedged under her nails, black mud coated her calloused hands, but when she unearthed a large root, a faint spark lit her expression. She kept going until she had several roots, which she tucked into her bag along with the bundle of firewood. Back at the cave, she arranged the firewood in a corner, striking stones together over a bit of dry grass. The flame flickered, then caught, spreading warm orange light that danced across her gaunt face and hollow eyes. She placed the cassava near the glowing embers. The nutty aroma began to fill the cave, masking the musty dampness. When the cassava was cooked, she picked one up, blew on it to cool, and bit off small pieces. The faint sweetness was nothing like a fine meal, yet at that moment, it was the most precious food in the world. Each bite not only eased her hunger but gave her a fragile hope that tomorrow might be better than today. Outside, the forest was swallowed by darkness. Wind whistled through cracks in the rock, carrying the rustle of leaves and, now and then, the distant, haunting cry of a night bird. Though unease still lingered, the small fire brought her a thread of safety, however delicate. Leaning back against the stone wall, Tuna closed her eyes. For the first time in many nights, she wasn't falling asleep from sheer exhaustion, but to hold on to this rare moment of peace before a new day began.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Thì như mọi người cũng biết thì kênh của mình sẽ lên những nội dung về những câu chuyện tình yêu rất là cảm động và ý nghĩa của các nhân vật đời thực. Cuộc sống của họ xoay quanh những bộn bề cuộc sống cũng như tình yêu và gia đình, và cũng như là những khó khăn mà trong cuộc sống họ gặp lại. Mình hy vọng rằng những câu chuyện mà mình đưa tới cho mọi người cũng có thể góp phần để mọi người có niềm vui hơn trong cuộc sống, cũng như là giúp cho mọi người có thêm được ý nghĩa của
Stop.
kệ đi 1 phút sao đâu mà nói gì chả được, đừng có mà nhây. Hy vọng rằng vẫn có thể gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo, và mong rằng mọi người sẽ đóng góp ý kiến nhiều hơn cho kênh của mình để kênh của mình ngày càng có thể phát triển hơn.